Autotelic Foundation.
This talk was going to be a few different things before it was landed upon being this, which is going to be actually just a very gentle walk through the swamp with you guys, through my project, rather than what I've done before, which has been quite a theory-heavy exploration of what I've tried to do or want to do, or even kind of a fictionalized kind of account. But today is just going to be quite a gentle kind of description, I guess. And I'm going to land on a few key phrases, like for instance, we've got some here like model collapse and mush. If you've seen any of the work that I've done before, or the one that's going to be partially screened tomorrow, there's quite intense scripts that are very dense, black holes of words. But I think landing on a few of these words today will help maybe kind of demonstrate that I actually spend a great deal of time and energy agonizing over each of these terms. So yeah, I'm just going to walk through some early projects up until Bastard Fields, which was released and finished just this week. It kind of all started back in 2018-19 when I was halfway through a PhD and decided at that point that being in the library alone, doing a lot of research alone, was producing a lot of very uninteresting writing, uninteresting thoughts, and I realized that where I kind of get my joy and life force and interesting ideas from is to work closely with other people. A lot of the kind of labor processes that Nadeem mentioned, along with Studio Ghibli, which involves not just kind of labor, but also mistakes and happy accidents and things like that. So that's the kind of things that I've enjoyed doing with other people. And in pursuit of that, I kind of developed this idea, Most Dismal Swamp, which I'm just going to keep an eye on the time as well, because Nadeem suggested keeping it to 30 or 40 minutes. Which was meant to be a kind of elaboration of what I've been doing up until that point, which had been curating exhibitions, events, curating gallery programs, mostly in a kind of grassroots, smaller scale kind of thing, quite experimental and working very closely with artists. And it was something that I wanted to pursue in order to kind of do something a little bit different. And well, I'll go on to the first kind of set of keywords that came out of the first project, or came to me around the first project. Was the first thing I want to acknowledge was that the Most Dismal Swamp idea came or emerged at a time when there was a lot of work around that was quite inspiring to me. I mean, the artist duo New Scenario were creating these kind of semi-off-site or kind of composite images which involved people's works. They would curate exhibitions like on people's body holes and things like that. They were kind of a huge influence, and it was also Most Dismal Swamp emerged around a similar time as the Czech group BCAA, and also a kind of whole host of off-site exhibitions, which really kind of peaked, I guess, during COVID, when it hit the kind of high water mark of pottery in the woods with candles. But I also kind of really pursued a lot of I pursued curation as a kind of art form or something to do professionally. But I always found curatorial, like learning, curatorial discourse to be somewhat kind of turgid. So the one thing that I kind of went to, I could never kind of sit through Maria Lynn talking about the curatorial for another minute. So one thing I did look to instead of kind of curatorial discourse was things like TV Party. If you're not familiar with that, it's a kind of cable access show from the late 70s, early 80s in New York City, which was really just a kind of quite insane, chaotic vessel for a scene in a way. And that was something that really appealed to me as a kind of curatorial method, I suppose. But anyway, this first project, Swamp Protocol, was kind of like just me testing out a lot of different things. I'd never made any kind of film before. I hadn't ever worked with people in that way. But I was particularly interested in getting lots of artists together to see how we could develop a composite image together, something that could be representative of multiple realities coming together. And to maybe even create a kind of disorienting experience for people when viewing this. And I was also kind of interested in what this kind of means in terms of developing a kind of mental model to maybe help navigate this platform-mediated kind of realities that we find ourselves living in. So I found the swamp was something that was a kind of very useful thing for me in terms of being a space that is quite disorientating and maybe somewhat horizonless, densely populated with all kinds of strange critters and creatures, but also being somewhere that's like not quite land or water, the same way as our kind of platform-mediated lives are both kind of neither offline or online. There's something both. The day after the Swamp Protocol opened, Whalefall opened. So I kind of went to the opening for Swamp Protocol and then put this up all night with my friend Samuel Capps at his gallery, Gossamer Fog in London. And this was a kind of, again, a similar experiment, but then working more closely with artists to develop a very specific idea around how an exhibition could be, or a container for people's artworks could be something that we hadn't really seen before. For example, I wanted this container to be a whale's carcass. I was really interested in the idea of a whalefall being something that, if you're not familiar, is when a whale's body falls to the bottom of the ocean floor and all the little kind of crabs and things starts nibbling at its flesh. And it's kind of documented that there is new life forms that actually kind of start to emerge among those communities of critters that live and flourish in that kind of decaying body. And again, I thought that was a really interesting maybe symbol or analogy for thinking about kind of online social enclaves or spaces where people can develop new personas or identities that are maybe safer for them to test out in that space, or even just more fun or experimental, whatever. So in that sense, Whalefall was a project that really blew up the idea of Most Dismal Swamp for me, because it allowed me to kind of explore the idea of what I'm doing is not just kind of presenting works in a kind of narrative film or a kind of linear kind of film, but more as a kind of biome, something that's quite alive. Of course, you are sitting in front of a screen and consuming something in quite a linear way, but at the same time, you're viewing something that's a little bit confusing. It's almost like you're watching a Planet Earth, but without David Attenborough, so you don't really know what the hell's going on. There's no narrative necessarily. You're kind of getting a peep into this strange world with lots of things happening at once. And that, for me, that idea of the biome, the narrative as a biome, or even the artwork as a biome, something that's dynamic and living and surprising, and also with lots of things living together and sometimes in harmony, other times disharmony, some things getting more screen time than others. It was a very kind of not super egalitarian thing. It just happened the way it happened. That kind of seemed much more satisfying to me, more so than other terms that had been floating around at the time, such as world building. I'd never seen myself as being practicing that. It kind of drew me to a conclusion that this was a really inadequate term, for me anyway. I mean, it's something that I still teach my students when I'm living my other life as a lecturer. But for me, it was something that's a very inadequate term, and it seemed to do something or present the idea of the world as something that is harmonious. Or even if we're teaching world building as a kind of exercise for writers, one of the key parts of that is consistency. Consistency across your world kind of makes a world. But to me, actually, the idea of inconsistency, plot holes, and things that don't work together, that's kind of a world. And also these first two projects really kind of, if there was one kind of really strong, what do you call it, like, I don't know, proposal in here, to me, it was that music was a key part of these projects. So in Swamp Protocol, I commissioned Dutch artist Annie Nops to create a soundtrack. Jennifer Walton created a soundtrack for Whalefall. And to me, that was just a huge, exciting part of that process. There's not much more to say about that other than that I found it extremely exciting, and it's remained extremely key to me. So now we're kind of jumping into a kind of more a part where I think things start to take off a bit more and start to take more of a identity that I've been working towards. And this was a project called Mush that, firstly, it was the first and probably the only kind of like large-scale immersive installation that I've done. And it came about through presenting this idea to a friend of mine, Samuel Capps, who is an artist who also runs a gallery in London called Gossamer Fog, about creating an environment where people could kind of stand inside of that space and see the walls and almost feel like being inside of an Unreal Engine kind of game environment. So with kind of lots of late nights, cans of Monster, Stella, and our terrible maths, we managed to kind of create something that was actually a little bit like we wanted. But it was also an opportunity to kind of show the film, show the CGI and the elements again. It was just a container for all of these elements to come together. But it was also a project that kind of really brought together a few of the things that were less general, which I've described about Swamp Protocol and Whalefall, and start to become more a precise kind of thread or set of kind of concerns for Most Dismal Swamp to carry on with. So it was the first time I kind of actually wrote quite a poetic kind of theory fiction-y narration to go along with the film. I'll maybe play a little quick bit of it actually.
A multi-user shared hallucination is large from hallowed rot.
It is a communal investment in social codification of a shared game space, the rules, drastic protocols, ethos, rhetorics, and other invented elements that render in real time an immersive space that is distinct from an outside world.
But the disjunctive architecture of the magic circle, and of the momentary affectations of AFK lucidity, and the depthless anchoritism of the off-gridding Waldenponder is incompatible with this mixed reality OS.
Up a lot of unexpected images and words and terms. And again, that kind of goes back to like my perspective of what a world is to me anyway. But I kind of started to think about the narration and the writing that I was doing as a kind of bog Latin, which relates to bog Latin is a term in the UK for kind of the secret language of kind of Irish travellers. It's a kind of like secret kind of patois that kind of keeps it's like clandestine kind of language in a way. And that related to something that I was quite concerned with that motivated the production of Mush. Mush is a term that means a multi-user shared hallucination. It's from the world of playing text-based video games. The people that play those games often kind of just present one another with text, but they share the kind of, it's like playing Dungeons and Dragons. They share the hallucination, you invest in that hallucination, and that hallucination is also propped up by the codes and the ethos and the rules of a game as well. And those things are all kind of negotiated with each other to keep this hallucination alive. Again, another kind of aspect of what a world is, I think. So anyway, I was interested in using that topic to kind of explore something I was genuinely concerned with throughout COVID, which was I was kind of worried about some of my favorite venues in London, just bricks and mortar venues closing, because these are kind of venues where kind of cool stuff happens, but also people get together, and again, you kind of meet more unexpected people, again, more like a world and less like a kind of manicured space, more like a swamp than a garden, say. But that was kind of maybe what I was worried about, was seeing that fall away and turn more into a kind of retreat into kind of online enclaves where safety is one thing that can be provided by these spaces, but also so kind of pipeline to extremism as well. Not just to extremism, but also maybe a kind of watered down kind of sensorium that is developed by that community, a kind of life world or umwelt that is kind of developed by the group and agreed upon, a kind of multi-user shared hallucination that becomes a kind of ersatz world that you live in. So that kind of disassociation into these kind of smaller enclaves was something I was really interested in. And often how these smaller kind of worlds are kind of actually managed by a term that I came across. I don't know who came up with the term, but it wasn't me. Reality entrepreneurs, people who kind of community builders, people who manage communities. They often kind of develop things for people to invest in, a shared glossary, a shared lexicon, that kind of thing. And a lot of those concerns were kind of a foundation for a more recent work, which kind of represented a bit of a step up in terms of intensity of content and length. This was commissioned by Nadeem for the Poetics of Encryption exhibition. And Scraper was, again, like, this is where I kind of first stumbled into the world, or the kind of the thinking around the idea of model collapse. And also understanding that term as a kind of something from machine learning, which, as Nadeem's explained already, I was kind of interested in how that term, well, any term to do with AI actually, or any kind of thinking about AI can't be done through the understanding that AI is something over there. Model collapse is not something over there, and AI is something is not over there. It's in the room with us, and we're kind of creating stuff for it right now, and I can see it all in your eyes. So Scraper was kind of looking at the idea about how, again, something kind of similar to the video that Nadeem kind of introduced by Eva and Franco, where there was a kind of reciprocity between us and that kind of digital neural kind of environment where we're becoming more machine-like. We make ourselves more machine-readable. We start to read and act more like machines. And those machines that I saw us acting more like were scrapers or web crawlers. These are little simple basic algorithms that have a very limited sensorium, if you want to call it that. They see what they need to see out there on the internet to grab it and take it into their database. This is how a lot of information is scraped and gathered for data sets for artificial intelligence, but also just for, you can use a scraper for filling in your spreadsheets at home or whatever. So I was my kind of gambit was that we are kind of behaving more and more scraper-like. And in a sense, this was a kind of narrative I wanted to tell through the perspective of almost like a folk tale. I was quite concerned with the maybe popular presumption that things like memes are kind of folklore. I kind of think they're not. I think they're, again, machine-readable artifacts produced for traction for certain things. There is a kind of like, that was primarily what I was interested in with Scraper, was looking at not online life in general, but perhaps the discourse that is propagated through the architecture we have online. And that being productive of a certain kind of lore or folklist lore, or maybe even a kind of winter of artifactual intelligence. And that kind of brings us to the most recent project, the Bastard Fields, which in a lot of ways continues from what Scraper had kind of brought up for me and what I want to explore, but also, again, it kind of signified a kind of even bigger kind of jump into kind of being a bit more ambitious and working with kind of more intense kind of technologies and CGI as well. So essentially with the Bastard Fields, I was kind of interested in exploring what this kind of architecture is. We've heard quite a lot about hallucinations from AI, but my kind of thinking was that it's kind of hallucinations all the way down in a sense. I've already spoken about sensoria and umwelt, the way we see the world, the way scrapers see the world. We all kind of live in our hallucinations or a shared hallucination. And if I weren't hallucinating right now, my mind, I would probably explode because there'd be too much information for my brain to kind of handle. I need to kind of hallucinate something that I can actually parse in front of me. So there are these hallucinations forms a kind of architecture that we navigate together. And what I was kind of concerned about with the architecture is the increase in more adversarial hallucinations, not just created by AI, but then again created by these reality entrepreneurs, these communities, these kind of vying things, all the things represented by the flags in Joshua Sutherland's ideologies, all the different kind of adversarial hallucinations. So I was kind of interested in this film to kind of present quite a lot of different scenes or vignettes of maybe not the neural media escape, but neural media escapers, people who are buttressing this architecture, developing this architecture, and want us to be a part of it. Not just kind of Silicon Valley, but maybe kind of people like you and I who kind of come to these kind of events, but also kind of maybe manage a community. I don't know. And I think with that being, or with me at least perceiving that as the kind of architecture or the environment that I am part of, as someone who has grown up, loved art, loved academia, invested myself in those things so I could become really a part of those things in that life, I've started to feel more and more kind of like sad and alienated from that place where I really wanted to be. So I think in that sense, I wanted to kind of represent or explore that kind of alienation and why that existed in me and why I thought it might be important to talk about. And one of the reasons I thought it might be important to talk about was that it kind of represented some of the damage that model collapse does. Model collapse essentially is something that in its essence collapses towards a median, like the mid, the kind of statistical invariability of what can be output by like an AI model, or at least kind of recognized by something in an AI model. So in that sense, what I was interested in was like the outlier data. And to put that in a way that was kind of meaningful for me, I kind of thought about my relationship with becoming an artist or falling in love with art, and how that was enabled through things that where outlier data or strange artifacts was kind of more part of a mainstream, easily findable kind of culture. And I'm talking about like in the UK anyway, there was like Channel 4 where like late at night you could stay up late and find weird cartoons and stuff, but kind of not really anymore. I kind of worry that, I mean, maybe being a bit too much of an old man or something, but I kind of worry that a lot of my young students, for instance, I find culture on my feed. So there's kind of not a space for late night weirdness, and I kind of wanted that to come in through the work in a way. And maybe a space where late night weirdness occurs on the feed is that for some reason my algorithm has really been throwing quite a lot of like sad, like divorced dads my way, and yeah, just a lot of kind of strange individuals, and it's quite weird to watch them. I've seen quite a lot of strange things just on the main feed, and these are real people. It's almost like quite a David Lynch thing in a sense, that David Lynch wasn't really conjuring dreamscapes in a sense, but he was actually representing the people that he saw in American coffee shops. So I feel like I was doing that with my feed in a sense. So those were a lot of the things that kind of came and got swept up into the Bastard Fields. As you can tell, it's a bit of a kind of casual talk, this one, and the reason for that was because I initially wrote all these theses on model collapse, and I'm not going to go through them because they do not spark joy. So instead, I'm going to talk about, does anyone here work at Rossmann? Okay, I was hoping for the next project I could get like a sponsorship of Salbei tea. It was something I was consuming constantly, but what else I consumed throughout the kind of production of The Bastard Fields, which was both beautiful and extremely brutal in a sense. It kind of, there hasn't been a project that I've done with Nadim that hasn't physically demobilized me. This one actually also killed someone's Alienware computer as well. But I mean, centrally here, like I never include memes in presentations, but I couldn't help seeing this when I saw it in one of my students' works actually. And I've had feels you people couldn't draw Wojaks of, and I think indulging more the aspect that of what my practice could be in terms of exploring feelings. So, I mean, that's kind of come up quite a lot in recent arts discourse, that maybe there's a kind of lack of intensities or feelings. We've had kind of rich kids writing reports in magazines that they can't feel anything, but like, if you're going to go to like a biennial, you're going to see biennial art. Just like watch Jam, for instance. Like one of the kind of main things that influenced me was Channel 4's Jam by Chris Morris. Again, a kind of weird vignette, kind of sketch show of weird feelings, things that can't be described necessarily, maybe a bit paranoid or trippy or weird. But again, these are the kinds of emotions I was interested in, the feels that you can't draw Wojaks of. I think a lot, going back to that kind of idea of like arts discourse kind of being unhappy or unsatisfied with the amount of feeling we have. We'll have conclusions being shown to us that we want kind of an artwork, or we want work that kind of gives us a feeling again, instead of kind of presenting us with art speak or whatever. But I think that's still like a really unambitious thing. So I think with The Bastard Fields, I kind of wanted people to watch it and feel 100 different unnameable feelings from 1 minute to the next. I probably don't achieve that, but it's kind of, I thought, a pretty ambitious thing to have, and a pretty solid goal to have. But then people do achieve this. So again, there's kind of artists like Spencer Clark, a musician I absolutely love, whose music seems to be, to me, a kind of document or exploration of these unnameable spaces, almost like a kind of xenoethnographer or something like that. And again, going back to music being a really key part of the work, I treated The Bastard Fields less like commissioned soundtrack, and this time more like a mixtape or something. So actually, the whole idea of The Bastard Fields came from being on a treadmill, if you can believe it, and listening to Torpor, this kind of British, now no longer with us, doom metal band, which presented me, I think, kind of gifted me with the image of a bog body walking through the kind of Scottish hills. I think that's all I was going to do. Like I said, I just want to walk you through some of the projects. I think maybe at this stage, because I kind of rambled through the projects, it might be a good opportunity to say, if anyone wanted me to go back to one of the points, or a question, or...
Play us a clip from...
Oh, yeah, I'll do that, okay. Hope it works. Okay, so just to contextualize, I'm going to play a clip that's not in the screening tomorrow. So contextualize this one, I called this little sequence the Clamor and Humiliation of Brownie. The Clamor and Humiliation, I think, is something that's quite key to how, well, a lot of things work. It kind of it refers to a ritual in the church in which relics are kind of demoted or have their powers kind of revoked from them through a kind of ritual called Clamor and Humiliation, a humiliation of the relics. I think that is something that is really prominent, and if you think of like AI artworks that maybe output kind of like sloppy music, but then to base that music on the value of the data set. So the data set includes, say, choirs from like nice regional places of the UK, or queer choirs. So they have these special value that therefore makes their slop absolutely valuable. So I think, and also Brownie was a character as well. It's literally something I saw on the internet, like a lot of art. But it's someone who was dressed as the sloth from Zootopia for Halloween. And I thought, there's a person just working a shitty job, like I've worked many shitty jobs, trying to squeeze a little bit of joy into their lives by dressing as a sloth. That's perfect.
Wakey, wakey, nobody's daddy. Grumble, grudging of fruitless discourse with the high winds and blustering hype cycles. It bemoans exile, even though exile be the way of all things. Yet the whales collapse, even though collapse be the scaffold of all things. The grudge is the necessity of hallucination, even though hallucination be the kernel of all things. Pilgrim that senses an angel, yet a snare in the world's kelter and fright. Always in wordless mists. You're a ghost. Like our standards, for fuck's sake. And too often this angel shout images, the mixed-red as down daily, the training second side. Like a mystic's precious unknown, drained of its most woeful serenities for its motivational white paper. And they are indeed acting on you, Wamkin. These hallowed third-party images, which say to the seers, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us, wagons, but speak unto us, smoothings.
Take a seat for like 1 minute or two, Dane. So I think you got a very small taste of the Bastard Fields, but how long is the full runtime of this artwork?
I think it's 2 minutes longer than Scraper, so about 73 minutes.
Okay, so how many minutes was that clip?
3 minutes.
Okay, so it's a very intense ride, and I think in the full cinema without the ambient light, I think you can really take that journey. But Dane, you know, we've been talking about your take on kind of the internet culture and how it kind of molds subjectivities and so on. But you know, it looks like a horror film. So like, what is it about the sort of, I guess, could I call it gonzo, like horror aesthetic that's sort of present in your work, or would you describe it differently?
I mean, I don't foreground that, but then I can't disagree with it because you're right, it's there. I spend a lot of time like listening to a lot of like heavy metal, and one of my favorite bands, Primitive Man. I remember their vocalist kind of being asked a question about the type of music they make, which is very doomy, and he kind of said he just wants people to feel quite horrible. It's kind of a dumb thing to say in a sense, but it's making people feel something that they maybe don't normally feel. And I think that is a really interesting scaffold for helping you think as well. If you have a certain feeling or reaction to something, then it puts you in a place to think about it in a different way, maybe.
Well, I mean, that's the pitch. Come down and feel horrible. But okay, so at least for an art film, 75 minutes is like approaching epic length. But as you say, the sort of like the kind of consistency and of plot and things like that. It's more kind of, I don't know, it's not so consistent. But isn't epic all about kind of that long arc of narrative? I mean, could we follow a story?
Yeah. I guess there's kind of a story which follows a bog body.
You'll have to explain what a bog body is.
If you don't know what a bog body is, it's someone who dies or is dead lying in a bog which preserves the body for thousands of years, for a long, long time. When a bog body is found, it's often assumed that it's maybe a victim of a untimely death. Recently, but actually it's just very old. It's the skin and the hair is very well preserved. So this bog body awakens among a community of strange kind of figures, among kind of strange little relics and toys. It has strange kind of wooden wings attached to its back. You don't know whether they're there as a kind of ritual or a mock, or some bog bodies were buried with branches laid across them so the witches couldn't escape. That bog body just walks around the hills for quite a long part of the first film. Then it meets another character, has a talk with that character, and then it kind of goes walking again at the end of the film. So there is a trajectory for that character, and also for some of the other characters. There's two girls you saw in that called the creative directors, and then there's Brownie as well. It's more kind of abstractly portraying scenes, almost a bit like, one of my favorite films is Gummo by Harmony Korine, which kind of shows like lots of kind of scenes falling from the sky from this tornado. It's a little bit like that.
And it's hard to see because of the light, but the sort of the script, the text, you use this very strange language, very kind of quasi-archaic language. This was also present in other works of yours. So it feels like a kind of ethnographic artifact. But is it a real language, or is it a kind of confabulation of your own? And why this sort of this shade of archaism?
Yeah, it's very deliberate, and it's kind of a combination of all those things. So some words, for instance, are made up deliberately, maybe to sound like a stupid term, or maybe because I think it might be a useful term. But also there are terms of kind of excavated from my own kind of native dialect of Doric, which is a kind of northeast Scottish language, not language, but a dialect really. Because it kind of gives me joy in a way to go back to that and to reintroduce it. And I think that speaks to a lot of what is relevant to the model collapse idea about kind of being model collapsed into this kind of de-regionalized lingua franca of art, of language, of images, of whatever, of memes. So I think a way to kind of push back against that is to kind of speak in this way, and I feel justified in doing that because it's something I've enjoyed reading in other writers. I've read some Alan Moore books, and he's written in such a way that causes me to want to look up words and their meaning in kind of archaic dictionaries or Wikipedia or whatever.
And in this film, some of your characters or actors or whatever they are, I mean, they meet in a real place in Scotland, which is a cave or a kind of a underground ancient religious meeting place.
Yeah.
And you've dragged a real live robot from the from like the engineering department of University College London to this underground church. There's been a few kind of secret religious meeting spaces that I've used. So in Scraper there was a secret chapel that I kind of scanned using neural radiance fields in Aberdeen, where I come from. But in this, we went to a place called Pedon's Cove in Scotland, where we took a DIY kind of robot that my friend Christopher McInnes made. It's this kind of artwork that he performed as. We filmed that and left a blank space where we composited the bog body in, so they had a conversation. But this place, Pedon's Cove, is where Pedon, who's another character in the film, was a 17th century Scottish religious dissident, a Covenanter. He would kind of hold these kind of secret field conventicles there. And that was a kind of a key thing for the Bastard Field, is the fact that
the Covenanters and these field conventicles would have these safe kind of spaces, shared hallucinations, these kind of spaces where they could practice their religions ostensibly in a safe space, but that safe space exists in an extremely hostile environment that kills people. Not only that, there's kind of soldiers with guns looking for you at the same time. To me, that is kind of how I would describe being on the internet, trying to find a safe space in a hostile in a hostile environment.
And just a word on your collaborators. I mean, when I gave your bio earlier, it was like, it's like a mixed reality biome, a multi-user shared hallucination. But I mean, you said briefly that you started as a curator and now it's sort of maybe rebranded. But these films, it's not like you are inspired by real sculptures or artworks or performances with friends of yours, and you bring them all together.
Yeah,
is that how it works?
Things kind of seem to that I know about seem to maybe think. Maybe it's similar to how you curate things, but I see something that might fit in with a narrative or idea I'm developing. But in the same sense, I'm not looking for something that's super consistent. I'm quite like that, not arbitrariness, but there's something that draws me to a work. And in this sense, I'm kind of learning slowly to be like a lot less theoretical or and be a bit more kind of intuition, follow my intuition a bit more, and allow the kind of chance outcomes of those meetings of things to kind of push the work forward. And I think that's happened with a lot of collaborators, or maybe with all collaborators, is that I always start with kind of very strong directions, ideas, storyboards, scripts, whatever, but then everything really gets pushed into a really unexpected area when the collaborators kind of like start
pushing back.
Pushing back, yeah.
As they do from time to time. Not always on my watch. I want to say thank you very much, Dane Sutherland.